I'm not wearing fragrance. It's my natural essence,
you know
honey.
What? That's an interesting statement in light of, this summer when I said something and you said, "Don't I stink?" You remember you said that?
Welcome. Thank you for joining us, everybody. My name is Sean Bowen, and on behalf of the diverse group of faculty, students, and staff who are organizing this event, I'm pleased to have you with us. Globalization, human rights, civil liberties, security, inequality, self-determination, free speech, patriotism, cultural identity. Public service in the aftermath of September 11th. What world do you want? As you can tell from walking into this space tonight, this is a departure from the standard forum event. We're hoping to host a conversation which includes all of your voices. We'd like everyone here to feel comfortable to join us and share what's been going on for you individually as you wrestle with taking in what happened on September 11th and its aftermath. We'd like to ask you to think about, as part of the Kennedy School community, direct or extended, with an interest in making the world a better place, what has changed, if anything, for you since September 11th as you try to think about how to make a difference in the world? Is it changing what you're going to do, what you're thinking, what you're imagining, how you could make a difference, how you see the world? That's the conversation we'd like to have tonight. Just to do a few rules of the game, we're going to start with a video montage, which is about 8 minutes of voices, a montage of Kennedy School faculty, students, and staff who taped about 3 weeks ago, starting us in this conversation. We're then going to ask people to queue up on any of the standing mics, and then we have two terrific colleagues, Roshnak Amir-Tarani, who's a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School, and Nolan Bowie, who are going to co-facilitate this conversation tonight. He's on the faculty. And they are going to have these hand mics, and we'll also pass them around. So if you're queuing that you want to speak, they're likely to put a mic in your hand and have you be the next person. We're going to host this conversation until 7:30. And then we're going to stop, and we're going to have refreshments and continue the conversation in smaller groups. So we hope you'll stay with us, and we appreciate you joining the experiment. This is a series. We've already had one of these events. We're going to plan to continue them into the next term, and we look forward to having you join us. Thanks again. Can we roll the tape?
I'm Nazanin Samari. I'm an MPP2 here at the Kennedy School, and I'm Iranian American. So I find myself highly aware of many perspectives, and I wish that there was room for more of that in the conversations that I've been hearing at school. I see many points in common that Americans and and at least Iranians could understand about what has gone on and what led up to September 11th. I mean, to me, it's about minority dissent. What do you do when you disagree and you don't have you're not given sort of legitimate, meaningful space to disagree and have that disagreement be heard. And I think that that's something that resonates in American history, in our own history, and I wish that when we thought about what to do in the future, we sort of took account of that and took account of all the points that we have in common and tried to think beyond, where I hear the conversation stopping, which is that terrorism is wrong and that's not the answer to anything. And I wish we could take a step beyond that and say, okay, what is the answer? What is the hard work that we have to do? And who has to take what kinds of responsibility to create a community where this kind of thing doesn't happen again.
Well, it's imperative in order to solve the global problems that we all think globally about politics, about the issues of class warfare that seem to have come to the forefront, and also to have an understanding of what the lives of the people are like around the world. I think it's also critical that we become less self-absorbed in ourselves and our families and look outside to what we can offer to our communities, to what we can offer to the United States. And I think that's one way that we can honor those who lost their lives on September 11th.
As an economist, I see at risk a global community in which there really is hope for shared prosperity, because these events could divide the world and could frustrate the great potential that we have today with our science, with our technology, if we use our brains with morality and with good intention and goodwill. I think that what we should take from September 11, therefore, is an even greater rededication to the goal of a global shared community of values and of prosperity, and especially for the rich countries and especially for the United States to commit its vast technology and wealth to solving some of the crushing problems that create so much misery abroad. That, in the end, is going to be what gives us our safety and what helps to deliver the kind of world of values and hope and shared aspirations that we so much want for ourselves and especially for our children.
Has confirmed again for me the importance of asking what we can do for our country and the world, and has made me feel more than ever the value of being involved with, associated with, and contributing, if only in some small way, to this school and this community and these wonderful faculty and students with whom I have the pleasure and privilege of working. I hope we will be part of the solution, and I hope that the days like November 22nd and 1963 and September 11th, 2001 are finished, that we will never again have to experience such a thing.
And like everyone around the world, I was absolutely shocked by what happened. Personally, I feel that this is a time in which America and her friends are put to the highest test of standing to the principles of freedom and liberty and equality in times which are the most difficult to do so. We can't not respond to the terrorist attacks by becoming like the elements that attacked us. And my second sort of main thought is that we've quickly become into a new world order where we have to really reconsider how we deal with developing countries and failed nation states or states on the brink of failure, because we're increasingly becoming a world in which small groups of people can unleash devastating consequences on peace-loving people.
The term impact of this has made me think very strongly about my own professional work. I spent a lot of it focused on poverty in the developing countries, as well as the question, and very specifically at one point working in Peshawar, Pakistan, among the Pathans on the design of a rural development program. I continue to ask the questions of what does this mean for my professional work? Do I need to be shifting back to a course and set of issues that I had looked on earlier? How do I bring together what I'm currently doing? It also fills me with lots of thoughts as someone with grandchildren about what the world in which those grandchildren will live, and how, one, I interpret what's going on to them, and two, I try to leave them a world which is livable. So it's been a time of enormous introspection and asking across the range of personal and professional life, what is the implication of all this? It's a struggle that I will continue to engage in the days coming.
One of the realities that has hopefully begun to hit home for us is that we cannot build barricades tall enough or make screens tight enough to ward off every threat, that we have to work for some basis for peace and for justice around the world, and certainly in the Middle East and Central Asia. I think it is also true that given all this pain and loss and anger, one of the lessons is that we need to understand people's differences. We need to understand their histories and their cultures and their sense of grievance and loss, or these threats will come back again and again. And we need to understand other people's views of the U.S. on their own terms. I'd like to see us do more as a school in the direction of that kind of understanding and that kind of leadership, and building the skills it takes to exercise leadership in that kind of world.
Like Sean said, my name is Roshanak, and I'm a mid-career student here. And I just want to share with you briefly, like Nazanin, I'm an Iranian American, having migrated to America after the Iranian Revolution. And I came here with some preconceived notions of what I would do with my life in public service. And after September 11th, I've had, for many reasons, as so many of you have had, I'm sure, feelings of unease in the pit of my stomach. And I realized one of the reasons for those feelings is that I am very afraid that I will not look at this incident and look at myself and my goals in terms of what will be my optimal use as a public servant, with the hopes that the children I hope to have and the grandchildren I hope to have will be in a better world. I'm afraid that I won't look at my goals and I won't have the courage to say, you know, my goals weren't right and I need to do something else. So I'm honored to be here with you on the eve of the anniversary of Pearl Harbor and to share with you the possibilities as we talk about what do we need to do truly, where have we gone wrong, what can we do to make the world a better place and to be better public servants. So I urge you to be honest and open, to ask questions, to answer questions, to disagree, to agree, and to walk away from this looking inward and sharing with other people. So I'll open up the conversation of what are your thoughts on public service? Where have we gone wrong? Where have we gone right?
Hi. My name is Trent Thompson. I'm a student here at KSG, and I can remember coming to orientation and being bright-eyed, bushy-tailed before September 11th, and then right here in the forum, watching on that screen the events unfold, and it definitely changed and affected how I viewed public service. And since September 11th, there's been a number of forums, there's been a number of discussions among friends, there's been a number of panels, and they've all helped me at least to come to try to grapple with what's happened, how to view public service from here. And the one thing that at least I have, and many people mentioned as well, is that we have to look at public service from a more integrative approach, a more holistic approach. It can't be the Descartesian way of where you break something apart by its parts and try to figure it out from there. It has to be more holistic, and the analogy that is used with environmentalists a lot is the tree, where you have a tree and you have, instead of just looking at it as a piece of wood, you see it as a home for birds, you see it as holding fertile soil, you see it as shade for someone to read under, you see it as food for animals to eat. And it's that way of thinking that I believe we should look towards public policy and public service. And within that basic framework, and this is the elective that I chose for my coursework, was the use of force, the political and moral criteria for it. And from that class, I've learned that there's really one basic right that all people have, and that is a right to life. And that although I do agree with what the U.S. has done with action in Afghanistan, I also believe that that's only out of absolute necessity, and that the reason for looking integratively is that such that we can create public policy that is preventative, so that we don't have to worry about having to ever have to use force for self-defense in the sense that we are now. And how we do that is looking towards the future instead of just what is right here, right now. What can we do? And as Nazanin said in her video montage, who needs to be responsible. And in order to put some concrete value to what I'm saying, maybe it's my opinion that the UN should be much stronger, that the UN should be the sounding board to nations that need to have a voice, that don't have a voice, so that the perceived need to use force or to use terrorist acts in order to be heard is eliminated. And that's just the point of view that I have.
As a matter of full disclosure, we do have some special guests, but ordinary members of the larger community sitting among you. Their names appeared in the notice. They are Marty Chen, Michael Ignatieff, Sanjeev Kegram, and David Pryor. They will, from time to time, be commenting just as you. Now, if one of us is not near you, please feel free to just stand and get behind one of the microphones in the audience.
Hi, I'm Marty Chen, and I've been thinking a lot since September 11th about why I don't speak up much in U.S. circles, and I realize that it largely has to do with the fact that I was raised as a third-generation American in India, that my father was born in India, but it's now Pakistan, and we raised our kids in East Pakistan, and then it became Bangladesh. And so I've been part of that world where a lot of this is unfolding since I was 1 year old. And I must say the last 10 years, I go there all the time, I spend 2 to 3 months a year there. The last 10 years, I always come away saying something's gonna happen, something's gonna give. And there are 2 reasons for that. One is that I work on the issues of low-income households, the work of women, and so I'm in villages and in slums a lot of the time, and I can see the misery, I can feel the poverty. And the other is that I move with a lot of elites in those countries as well, and I hear the resentment of the US. I'm always questioned about, how do you feel about the US? So I can see the injustice, I can see the fact that there's this pervasive poverty and this concentration of really extreme wealth in the world. And I am always having to justify the US, and I always say, well, I'm not really from the US, I'm really Indian, because it's hard to explain. The US is seen as arrogant. The US is seen as very self-interested. The US is seen as very hypocritical and very selective in its foreign policies. And of course, there's all the concentration of wealth and power. So with those 2 sets of forces, always what I bring back with me, I just felt something was going to happen. Now, I did not, of course, predict September 11th, that airplanes would become flying bombs, but I knew that there was injustice. And so unlike my colleague Jeff Sachs, I don't think it's September 11th that's divided the world or will divide the world. We were divided. And we've got to figure out ways to come back, to bring us back together. And the centerpiece of doing that, whatever kind of global mission that we want to create, for me has to do something with economic justice and with political justice. Unless the poor and the excluded can make their economic claims, make their political claims in our today's world, we're going to continue to have these kinds of poisonous brews that will lead to these kinds of events. And so I don't think we can leave the political injustice to fester the way we did in Afghanistan. We use them for our self-interest, and then we leave them to fester. And I don't think we can leave the economic injustice to market forces. Just let the markets resolve the economic injustices. The poor cannot compete in those markets. They don't have the productive resources. They don't have the power, the bargaining power, the access. And so my work has been dealing with these issues all along. So the question then is, how does my work and life change with September 11th? And I think for me, it's framing the issues of September 11th in terms of the poverty and the structural injustices that are there in the developing world, and helping see the linkages. And the linkages are here in the US as well. I also watched the whole event unravel on the TV here. And then I very soon, within the week, received an email, because I work on labor issues, about all the unionized workers that had died in the towers. And my immediate thought was, but there are a lot of non-unionized workers, unregistered workers. What about them? And I think that story has begun to unfold. So for me, it's partly business as usual. These are issues of deep concern, but it's also framing what's happened in our world in terms of this economic injustice.
Hi, my name is Yuki. I'm here as a first year in the Master's in Public Administration and International Development program. The question about public service after 9/11, when I'm thinking about that, this sort of thing, I always think about what has motivated me to take this path, to come through public service, what always motivates me, and how I got here. And that, I think, for everyone has to do with their own personal history. And to tell you a little about myself, I am a Japanese American. I grew up in Texas, and there were a lot of circumstances as I was growing up that first made me think critically about race politics in the U.S. And that was a vehicle for me to begin to think critically about the social world, about how we all connect and everything. And it's actually kind of ironic, as was mentioned earlier, that tomorrow is the bombing, the anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and it just makes me feel a little bit sad, or very sad actually, that tomorrow, I don't know, 50-something years later, we have a situation where we are having a world in which the U.S. is, again, taking back civil liberties of various groups, and I think it's going to be targeted towards minorities. I think it's in the name of the greater public safety and everything, but at the same time, I think that there are probably more constructive ways about dealing with the threat of terrorism. And it's really sad, because as I was growing up, I went to college and I was making more linkages about the world, and of course poverty is in there, gender, all these things that are all connected started to make me think more holistically, and then how we connect to the rest of the world. And so that's why I'm here. That's why I want to do development work, so that we can address fundamental issues, such as the billion people who are in absolute poverty, gender inequality, that sort of thing. And I think that is where the root causes of, or the kind of the pool of reasons for violence to come out has the strongest reasons. And that's not really being dealt with as like the first priority, and I think that's the most troubling for me, because people who are in absolute poverty are probably going to be a little bit mad about it if they see someone or a select group systematically reaping the benefits of the economic world or the social world and everything. And I would like to see that be addressed more, and that's what I hope to. For me, it's giving me a greater sense of urgency to deal with these issues in earnest, and I hope that maybe the U.S. government will take that to light as well.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Charles. I'm a Canadian public servant. I'm here for a couple of weeks to reinvigorate here at the school, and I thought I'd share with you tonight probably two vigils that I've had in the post-September 11th period. Several days after September 11th, I joined 110,000 Canadians, mostly public servants, and we met on the front lawn of our House of Parliament, and we had a half-hour memorial service. And I wanted to share with you tonight one element from that particular experience, and that was we spent several minutes in silence. And the incredible silence, sitting or standing in a crowd of 110,000 people, and how much silence can be on a warm, sunny September afternoon in Ottawa. And I was struck by just how quiet and how thoughtful this huge crowd, which assembled and dispersed in near complete silence. And if you can imagine 110,000 people walking away after the service, and there wasn't a sound in the crowd, just silent footsteps as we headed back to our offices and reflected. Now, I thought about that experience a little bit earlier tonight, but I wanted to share with you a rather Halloween experience I had last night. And my colleague sitting next to me in my classroom of the course that I'm taking is from Pakistan. He serves as an administrator for a region immediately adjacent to the border. And after we left the school last night, we walked back to our residence and we spoke about Afghanistan. And he had a rather harrowing tale, and he brought it to me in a very personal manner. He spoke about his experience working the border of the Khyber Pass region in Afghanistan. He spoke to me of the impact of having 3 or 4 million Afghani refugees who are living in the border regions in Afghanistan and the impact that has had on his country. He spoke to me about the desperate measures that many of those Afghani refugees have to take. He spoke of prostitution, which is rampant within the refugee camps, and as a means to raise money in terms of survival. He spoke to me about the poverty, the bloodshed. He spoke to me about how easy it is and how life is so little. He gave me an example of how you can simply pay an Afghani refugee a very small amount of money, and his estimate far less than $100 to remove someone who may be a problem to you because they are so desperate for money. So I thought about all these things, and it was a very quiet conversation as we made our way back to our residence. And it struck me as a public servant, and for those of you in the audience who will be public servants, what a role you can in fact play in your own individual countries, in your own administrations. There are many elements that a public servant can have an influence. We all have pens, and you can write and you can put forward ideas and imagination. But while you're doing that and reflecting on the experience, it struck me that thinking now of the experience of 3 to 4 million refugees from Afghanistan living in Pakistan and the immediate survival elements that they face in the next days, the next weeks, and as Pakistan as a government and as their officials seek to try to alleviate the suffering of the refugees and to try to come to grips with having that many people that they have to care about.
Will you please stand when you speak? The cameras are here not for surveillance purposes, but for keeping a record.
Hi, my name is Joyce Ferranti, and I do a couple different things. I do psychotherapy and consulting, and my specialty has been working in areas of trauma. And I guess I'm here because I've worked with people who do public service. And I want to get on my soapbox just for a moment to say, don't forget about the people. You know, what does it really take to heal a human being? You know, I've really looked at that since September, and I guess sometimes I put myself in the place of a woman in Afghanistan. How would I feel if the buildings are blowing up, if I don't have enough children, you know, food for I would be very angry. And what I've seen in my work over time is anger builds and it builds and it builds. And how in public policy, then how do you address the human being as you're addressing the policies? What really needs to happen to help people heal out of these events, and so that it doesn't reoccur generation after generation? Where I've worked in areas of conflict, it's very clear that it goes from one generation to the next.
And so how do we take policies and actually bring in funding to intervene at the level of the human being, the psychological, the spiritual, and the social, I guess. So I just throw that out there. I'm not sure I have a fast answer for that at this point, but I know that's one of the things that I've really been working on in my field since then. So I'm happy to be here and to be in this discussion. Thank you.
I've been handed this mic. I wish someone had told me what to say, but I don't quite know what to say. My name is David Pryor, and I'm the director here at the Institute of Politics. In behalf of the Institute and the Kennedy School, we want to thank all of you. This is a wonderful idea, a wonderful concept of coming here stageless and having people just from our community talk, not at one another, but with one another, and it's a wonderful concept. And I hope that Bill White and the Forum Committee here will sort of take note, and we'll do many more of events like this in the future. I just want to put out a word of caution here, if I may add a word, and we've been at this since September the 11th, I guess, and there seems to be that we're on the track of finding Osama bin Laden. Maybe they found him today, or maybe it's tomorrow or next week or next month or whenever, but eventually we will find him, whether he will be dead or alive, or we'll use George Bush's expression, whether we will have smoked him out. He likes that phrase, it seems like a lot, of his cave or caves or his hiding place, we don't know. But when we find him, there seems to me a belief that we're going to have a ticker tape parade in New York and celebration. Well, I can tell you that we're not. And I can tell you that we're in this thing for a very, very long period of time. This is something, this war, this conflict is something that we have never been into before in the history of this republic. It is not going to go away when Osama bin Laden goes away. It is here, and it is here with us. And I can tell you without reservation, it is your generation that is going to have to attack the root of many of these causes, which has bred this particular brand of evil. And it is hunger, it is poverty, it is hopelessness. 10 years ago, when the Berlin Wall came down, our country and our world missed a rare opportunity, a very rare opportunity indeed, to do something about world poverty and world hunger that permeates this world. What is it, 5,000 children starve to death each week in this world, or maybe more? 40% of our country doesn't even have health insurance. Is that any kind of a proud statement to make? No, it's not. But this whole problem is not going to go away, and as someone said, the markets are not going to take care of this, and the so-called free enterprise system is not going to trickle down and cure these great, huge pockets of disillusionment that we must address. And our generation has failed to do it. We have failed. We've tried. We've had a program on Islam. We're trying to understand better, and we had it right here. We're having other programs like that. We've had some cathartic type meetings and sessions here. In February, we're bringing the World Food Program people here to talk about world hunger and some of the things that we can do and begin doing that we haven't done. And but I just want to say we're not going to have any ticker tape parades anytime soon. And it's going to be up to you and your generation to do something about it, because mine has failed.
Thanks. I'm Gautaman Balachandran from MPAID first year. It's really nice to be a part of this conversation. I've been a part of it for quite some time now. I very much agree with what Marty Chen said as to the root causes. And I very much agree with what David Pryor had said about the causes being poverty, hopelessness, hunger. But I wouldn't want to stop at that. I would also then go on to say the double standards, the hypocrisy, the abuse of the power being abused, and of course the free market. For many, it has been for many, as David Pryor said, the generations who would be tackling this issue. Well, I come from a place where we have been tackling this issue for the past 17, 20 years. I come from Sri Lanka. And our small nation had been struggling and had been looking for the international support for a long time, and it never came. And take the terrorism treaty or the small arms agreement or whatever the treaty may be, the support never came in. And when it came in, I guess it has taken such a thing for such support to come through. And what is very perverse and vulgar is that the very fundamentalist elements who were the cause of September 11th are taking credit now for the response, which is very vulgar and very perverse. Another important thing which I would like to stress is that at a time like this, when we are dealing with or when we are responding, our response is as important. It has to be as sensitive. We have had, it is really, I'm finding it very difficult to see people, the global champions of human rights, condoning, certain acts, millions of Afghanistan people, being driven into this thing due to some reason. My worry is that this compromise could fuel much worse things. I just can't accept the concept of excellent human rights activist except on Monday mornings 9 to 10 when Afghanistan is being discussed. I just can't compromise or get those things together. And this particular aspect or this particular response would then be the fuel. 17 years ago, 20 years ago, when very similar things in a very microcosmic, very small way happened in our small island, our government responded in the very same way, use of power. And 17 years down the line, I can say with guarantee, I can say the experience that we are no better than before, we are no safer than before. In fact, we are much more worse than before. 69 suicide bombers, and recently our most democratic elections, we had 60 people killed. What I would like also to see from the viewpoint of the public servants is much more self-evaluation, much more sensitiveness, because that would carry a long way. And that, I guess, in the long term, is the way to tackle terrorism, is the way. There's no shortcut. Smoke out Bin Laden, we'll have more, there are more Al-Qaeda cells. There are more people. It's very difficult. It's as Jessica Stern said, it's a long drawn out. It has to be a very comprehensive one. Poverty alleviation is definitely one. A tempered globalization, I would say, should definitely be on the cards. I don't know. Everyone says about recently about WTO. How many of every OECD country has a minimum of 7 people in the WTO office to take care of their affairs. But 42 African countries put together have only 19 representatives. They just can't afford it. And many of the sub-Saharan African countries as well as the developing countries did not realize what a monster they were bringing in when a single line related to TRIPS was brought into the WTO. So developing human capital, being sensitive to how the others feel, not always thinking about self-interest, which is very short-term self-interest. In Afghanistan, it was pretty short-term. For Russians, it was pretty short-term when they were dealing with Afghanistan. So was it for the Americans. 45 billion poured in and brutalizing a country which knew no other way of responding but this way. What I call for is more sensitiveness, more measured approach, and definitely a tempered globalization. Thank you.
My name is Brent Coffin. I'm at the Hauser Center, and let me locate the problem that I work on before I put another element on the table. In trying to think through the size and scope of the nonprofit sector, it became clear that a good portion of the nonprofit sector in the United States is generated by faith-based ideas and organizations and activities. And the problem is that we hadn't thought very much about that. I've been trying to figure out how to think more carefully about that, and so let me tell you the variable I want to put on the table, religion. I grew up in a community, a suburban community, where religion was simply irrelevant. It had nothing to do with the dinner table or with what we did in school or what I did after school. After college, I went to work in the South Bronx to do community organizing and sort of arrogantly went to the local churches to really get them involved in the community, and discovered that there were reasons why they were still there and a lot of other organizations were no longer in the community. And I began to discover that there were resources there that were really pretty extraordinary and surprising to me. I then worked in other communities where I got very nervous about the power of religion to justify power and privilege because it conferred some sense of moral value upon us that the other didn't have. All of which is to say, I think religion is a powerful force and a very complicated force. And I think it's one that we have got to come to grips with in a new and more sophisticated way within our own society as a pluralist democracy and in other societies, descriptively as well as we try to work towards some kind of new and more just global community. I don't think we can ignore it. Osama bin Laden understands it's a powerful force, and so did Martin Luther King, and we simply have to come to grips with it.
I'm Amir Ataran. I'm a researcher at the Center for International Development. I wish I could actually say something that were optimistic, but I can't. And in myself, thinking of the wake of events and the post-event processing that I've had to do following 9/11, I have been drawn to reach a conclusion that many of you reached, at least many of you have spoken so far, that the roots of the event that took place very likely are bound up in a lack of privilege, poverty, a lack of education, a lack of opportunity, of respect for human rights, and so on. And that, therefore, the solution must be found in the promotion of those things. It makes total sense to me. But I'm a scientist, and I have this bad habit of taking my theories and looking for the evidence that fits them, or not. And this time I found a piece of evidence that really disturbed me. The people who perpetrated this were educated, were in many cases wealthy and privileged. In other words, the chief perpetrators had every advantage that we would seek to provide as a remedy. And that's worrying, because it could be used, though I will not use it this way, to argue that, in fact, ameliorating poverty shall do nothing. In fact, providing education shall do little. The rights of women in the end don't matter. The rights of children don't matter, and so on. I won't use it that way, but I'll use it to suggest something which, when I realized it, chilled me twice as much as I already had been. For people living in Germany, reading the newspapers, watching television, understanding events, and understanding, I suspect, very well with their university educations, what the true dynamics between the developed and developing world were, and having the power and the education themselves to act in a constructive way, well, those people with all those advantages chose to be evil. So they actually used their education, their training, and their privilege, and out of it found a logic, a very perverse logic, not defending it by calling it logic, but a perverse logic that led them to believe that the most rational thing they could be was tremendously evil. And if that is the case, if the best educated, most privileged minds of various societies are coming to the conclusion that the abnegation of human life is a solution, our problem is very much worse than we think.
Good evening, I am Edita Tahiri, coming from Kosovo, and I am here at Kennedy School of Government in my master degree program, and I would like to try to contribute to this tonight's discussion, which I find very interesting and important. I think that September 11 events have been a tragedy not only of national dimension for United States, but they were also international tragedy, because from the day we entered a new chapter of life, the chapter which in fact was diverting us from the problems like poverty and bringing us to a new problem. And I must say first that about the poverty issues, that we really all work hard to make this world better, but terrorism and other phenomena are in fact doing a lot of obstacles to the dynamics of the positive trends to the world. September 11 for me, as someone who put behind 10 years of tragedy as part of the nation which was oppressed for 10 years, which know how it is to be killed, I was really compassionate to the United States nation, because it was really killing of innocent people. And I cannot understand for which privileged minds we are talking about if idea to be implemented is chosen through the means of killing innocent people. I don't think so. Privileged minds think this way. But I tonight would like just to try to focus on the war in Afghanistan and tell what I was analyzing and what I think should it be happen or not. By coming I told you I am coming from Balkans, so I think I understand better than you logic of violence, because we have been living, our history is history of violence. In the Balkans, people more use, I call it language of violence or lingua violencia. We less know about language of peace. So following the day of tragedy in New York, my first reaction was that, of course, it should be retaliation. And should it be used force? Yes, because let me say to you, the people who use violence to take innocent lives, it's very difficult to expect them to understand but the violence. So the use of force was adequate, and I think that we are seeing now change in Afghanistan. I was so happy to hear that 2 days ago already there is a government established and that coalition forces are working together. And I know that millions of Afghanis are out of the country willing to go back home. So I think United States has done a lot of change in the Balkans, and it is continuing to do a change in the world. And this change, I am sure, will give us time also to focus more to poverty and other issues. So by seeing the actions, concrete actions of United States, what we should do, I think we should really think how we should do the joint actions. Because usually in the life, I speak very much from my experience. It's much difficult to do the job than to analyze it, post or pre. And usually the international mankind is more predisposed to analyze post festum and not pre. So I think that it's very good to help the dynamics of seeing change in Afghanistan and seeing that the war against terrorism is getting results, and that we will be able, as democratic world society, really in the position of giving right response to such evil which has plagued our world and which will block the future efforts for making our lives better. Thank you very much.
My name is Josh Good, and I'm a student over at the Divinity School, and would love to try to contribute a thought or two to this meaningful discussion. The first thing that comes to mind for me is this idea that with something as huge as the 11th, it's really easy to kind of like voice our thought about what's wrong with the world and sort of include that in the specific factors that led to the 11th. And I somehow think that's not very healthy, and got to hear a talk that Professor Ignatieff gave just a few days after the event that was helpful there and sort of being specific. So the first idea is that I think it's really healthy ourselves to try to model being specific about locating problems within differentiated institutions, and not just saying the world is wrong because of blah. The second thought is that one that relates to what Professor Coffin was just raising about religion. It seems like as we recognize with what Clinton was talking about recently, that our world is increasingly interconnected, and that there are plural faiths, plural cultures in that world, that it's really healthy for religious traditions to think more about encouraging congregants to develop a language that's accessible to people from other traditions. So the more that we can work toward developing a public moral discourse that other people can hear, not just within the states, but across cultures, you know, at the international level, I think maybe the better. So we got to think real carefully about how to do that, and maybe steps taken by the Catholic bishops there are helpful. Maybe steps in the Reformed tradition there are helpful. But we need to find models of ways that we can sort of talk to each other across faith lines. The final thought is just that that it seems like as we craft, in terms of the United States, a foreign policy response, it seems very healthy to explore partnerships between government and non-government organizations as best we possibly can. Specifically, that might look like taking the principle that Professor Coffin referred to about how a lot of non-government organizations do public things sometimes better than government bureaucracies. Well, what's that look like when it's applied to the international context? I mean, what's it look like to engage in proactive, forward-looking partnerships with the World Bank and with the IMF and with a host of other non-governmental institutions in a way that does some real help for people in other nations?
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Rose. I'm a student here in the MPID program. I want to, well, just one small thing about me is that I studied history as an undergraduate and have absolutely no regrets about it. I think it's one of the, well, the most important, well, subject to learn if you want to understand anything about the world today. And starting with the subject of history, I think everybody is more or less completely ignorant of the history of the region, the history of Afghanistan, the history of Islam, even just the cultural aspects. And if even just a cursory look of any of that history will tell you that anybody in the region has every reason to resent the so-called West. They have every reason to blame us. Well, I wouldn't say every reason. They could easily construct a kind of mentality that all our problems come from the West, stem from the West, where the United States has inherited all the colonial resentment of 200 plus years. That's all debatable, but starting from that, I think we can take it to the point of why should they at all adore us, have any positive feelings toward us? Why should they not hate us and resent us? And then if you start thinking in that sense, well, what have we done in the region? What has been our involvement in these countries? And it's mostly, looking at it, it's mostly just a kind of realpolitik and a certain self-serving kind of policy with some slight humanitarian efforts maybe once in a while, but overall they have no reason to like us at all, and they have every reason to hate us. So just from that simplistic point, I'd like to, well, maybe if we can somehow shift our policy somewhat to include something that would something positive, something to support something desirable, I don't know, and just bring that to the, when we start, we're basically constructing a nation in Afghanistan now, and maybe that could possibly be a way to bring so maybe some sense of admiration in the region. I don't know. That's just a comment I'd like to make.
I'm Mike Ignatieff. I'm one of your teachers here. I thought it might be useful to say something positive, hopeful, optimistic. Lift all your spirits with jaunty Canadian bonhomie. Wars are an opportunity, and we're at war. One of the most transforming things in the 20th century have been the two world wars, charnel houses out of which extraordinary good things came. If you think about the Second War, you start with Churchill and Roosevelt fighting for the national survival of their countries with no other idea than the national survival of their countries. Very quickly you get the United Nations, you get the Nuremberg Tribunal, you get the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you get the revision of the Geneva Conventions, you get the creation of NATO. My parents' generation, my father and mother were in their early 30s during the Second World War. That generation rolled up their sleeves and rebuilt the post-war world. The post-war welfare state is a creation of the Second World War. The creation of people coming home from the war and saying, we can't go on like we lived. We must have more justice. We must have housing. We must have education. Huge transformation of European society made possible by the Second World War. Go back to the First World War. The fact that women got the vote in this country and most other countries is a direct product of the women's contribution to the war. So think of war as a terrible teacher, as a terrible inspirer. I think David Pryor's right. We're in this war for a long time, and the challenge is to make sure that it is not just blood and destruction, but also a process of construction and renewal and rebuilding. I think if you look at the historical period we went through from '89 through to 2001, we thought in the West that we'd won a war against communism. We thought that the reconstruction of a post-communist world would be effortless. We thought we didn't have to put any new institutional architecture in place in the world at all. Globalization would just do it. Well, the challenge we now face is that we're faced with a tide of anger and rage, suffering, misery. We're faced with something that Amir Ataran, more than anybody else in this school, has taught me about, which is an absolutely terrifying epidemic, which is destroying social capacity, social hope, destroying the entire demographic structure,
of a part of sub-Saharan Africa in a situation where we've got the means to fix this. And I just think the challenge for you and the challenge for me is to see war as a moment of opportunity. If you come to me as individual students asking what I can do, I've got so many things you could do, I don't know where to start. If you're worried about civil liberties, join the ACLU. Join it tomorrow. Join some other group that you care about more. Write an op-ed, do something. If you're concerned about military tribunals, if you're concerned about justice at home, if you want to express solidarity with your fellow citizens of Islamic and Arab origins, work with them to stand up beside them to make it clear that Americans of all colors and religions want to stand for freedom. We don't want to sacrifice freedom in a war like this. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do on the home front. In terms of the long-term international architecture, we just can't go on with a situation where the world's richest country contributes what is 0.35 of GDP, or my country, Canada, hugely rich country, contributes some derisory percentage of its GDP to foreign assistance. The only country in the world which makes its GDP targets is Denmark, for God's sake. I mean, what kind of world are we in here? But that's fixable. That's a matter of creating a kind of Bretton Woods. Bretton Woods was also part of 1940, creating a whole post-war international economic architecture. Well, let's step up to the plate here. A situation of a big multilateral international effort to shift resources south, to education, to governance capacity building, to work with partners who are honest and not corrupt and know what an honest government is, and build these societies. We've got partners in the rest of the world who know exactly what honest, good, strong, courageous government is, and we need to bet on them and work with them and transfer resources south. This is the challenge of your generation internationally. In the short term, if you come to me and ask, what can I do? Go out to the World Food Program, join the UNHCR, get yourself out to a refugee camp, get your feet wet. This world can be made, this world can be rebuilt. Seize the moment. This is an opportunity. It's not a moment to sit in the Kennedy School and worry. It's a moment to use the education in the Kennedy School to turn your life around. This is a moment that changes human lives. This is a moment where you have a chance to say, well, I was going to join that firm, but actually I'm going to go out to that refugee camp. I was going to go and make 6 figures, but I'm actually going to go and do something else. This is the moment. This is the same moment that happened to my parents' generation is now happening to you. And it's a moment to seize. It's a moment to embrace. So I just... the other final thing to say, since I'm now in my sermonizing rant, and those of you who take my class know that when the fit is on me, I go on and on. I'll try to be brief, but remember what Larry Summers, the president of this university, said when he was introducing Al Gore. He said, just remember who was walking upstairs, the World Trade Center, the 11th of September. Public service workers. Public service has never been more important. These are the people you turn to when you're frightened, when you're scared, when you need protection, when you need help. Public service is the spine of modern democratic societies. And the firemen and the policemen knew that. And it's also a matter of deep class, trans-class solidarities, damn it. People I'm proudest to be a fellow citizen with were the rescue workers, the postal workers, the cops, and the firemen. I just feel I understood from them. They taught me what it is to be in a democracy, what mutual sacrifice and common citizenship really is. Now, we need to think about that. And we need to live according to that kind of example and that kind of standard. Thank you.
My name is Adam Taylor. I'm an associate at the Carr Center and director of an organization called Global Justice. Michael stole some of my thunder in terms of a call to action, but I just wanted to bring out a couple ways in which I've been feeling and ways in which I've grappled with September 11th and its aftermath, I'm reminded of Hebrew scriptures that say, when there is no vision, the people will perish. And a mentor of mine changed that slightly to say, when there is no vision, or when we lack vision, people cast off restraint. And I think that is a story, a tragic story that you can tell in many of the inner city ghettos of the United States. And it's a story that you can also tell in many of the Islamic parts of the world, many of the parts of the world that are the most deprived, many of the parts that lack the most hope because of basic needs not being met. And I guess my frustration, what I've seen through September 11th, as someone that sees themselves as trying to fight for this justice imperative that I hear so many people talk about, is how far apart my values and maybe my worldview is from mainstream America. And I can speak the most about America because I'm an American, and that could also be a gap with many of mainstream people in Europe and other parts of the world. When I look at our response, I don't see our nation necessarily grappling with the justice imperative that most of us, if not all of us, have acknowledged tonight. And that scares me. When I look at the monopoly of the media and the way that it's portrayed September 11th, and not wanting to deal or to get into what I see as a deeper discussion about some of the root causes, but instead try to promote a somewhat visceral, somewhat knee-jerk reaction that we all must be unified and conform to the same set of ideas about this crisis and this war, I see a real challenge in front of us. And for me, I feel like there's been a real amnesia and a real denial in the United States around our role in the rest of the world, let alone our responsibilities to the rest of the world based on what we have done or have not done. And for me, that's the conversation that I think can be transformative, and that's the conversation that I would like to have, and I hear happening right now, but my concern is, once again, that we may not be representative, or this conversation is not representative of what's happening in the rest of this country and maybe in many parts of the world. So the challenge as public servants for me is, how do you get that conversation into the living room of your average American, your average European, your average Asian, etc., and into the public dialogue, where it's not simply a matter of sound bites, and it's not simply a matter of all agreeing so we can be unified in a common threat, but it can actually get to some of the root causes and hopefully take action on them. So if people have ideas about that, I'm desperate for them, because that's what I struggle with every day.
Good evening. I'm a student here from China. I came here in November, just now. And I'd like to say here is, I would remind that I think the United States has won since the September 11th attack. You see, the Bush government has got its high support of the domestic, sorry, my English is poor, from the civil society. And second, you have raised the armed forces, the budget of armed force. And third, I think the United States has established its position in the Mid-Asia from this attack. And I think the most important, is U.S. has gained the world moral sympathy. No country, no organizations against this time, against the United States. So I think the United States not only suffer from this attack, but I think actually in reality, it's the winner. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Katie Cahill, and I graduated from the MPP program last year, and I see a few of my fellow classmates from that class, and it's good to be back. I'm also reminded of one of the the common occurrences during my 2 years, which was a lot of talk about what's wrong with America and what's wrong with our people here. And in as much as I think that there is a lot that we as a country need to do and consider about our role in the world, I think what September 11th taught me was the amazing generosity of spirit in people throughout this country who gave blood, gave money, gave their time, and gave their lives to help their fellow people in need. And it didn't matter what color your skin was, and it didn't matter if you were male or female or rich or poor. People gave everything that they could to help whoever they could. And I think at a time when it is so easy for us to oversimplify and to say that what happened because we are this evil country who ignores the problems of people in need and of countries in need. I think it's important to remember that what happened on September 11th was an act of nothing less than pure evil that is not justifiable for any reason, and that over 6,000 people on that day died. 6,000 families lost a parent, a child, a sibling, a loved one. And I don't think that we have done enough to remember those families. It hasn't been that long, and I question how many of you have spent as much time thinking about the pain that those families have encountered as you have been criticizing America's role in the world.
My name is Kendra, and I'm an MPP2 here at the Kennedy School. Most of my interest and commitment focuses on issues of race and public engagement in this country, although coming out of a summer working on all of these issues focused domestically and then entering into all of this forced me to kind of broaden a lot of the things that I was thinking about and thereby do all of them better, I hope, one day. I was writing this before Katie spoke, and I want to kind of respond in part. But I'll just start where I was and hopefully get there. If you don't mind, I'm going to read it too. While I believe that deeply entrenched poverty and a lot of the questions we've talked about on a global scale, as well as in this country, often invisible poverty and other conditions, are relevant always and must be addressed, I'm not under any illusion that education and wealth necessarily equal enlightened leadership. I think that traditional U.S. leadership has, sadly, but also for me, offering hope, consistently disenfranchised many, many, many populations as it has strived to determine who we are, who we represent, who we can be, but too often who's in and who's out. I think that we cannot disconnect this crisis, and particularly the immediate response, from the context of unquestioned power and unquestioned leadership and all the things that go along with that. Transformative change or response in my mind, though, and this is to Katie's question or point, I think, would mean to watch the kind of energy that you talked about and the kind of dedication and commitment to what it means to be American, and I put that in quotes, to see that kind of energy intersect with real and deliberative democratic processes, the kind of dialogues and the kind of conversations that actually force us to intersect with each other and not simply further entrench our beliefs. But I think that this is very difficult, especially in a time of crisis when people are so vulnerable, as you talked about. I don't exactly know how to make this happen, but I do believe that there needs to be a different kind of urge for questioning our own leadership in committed and caring ways. Thank you.
I wanted to pick up on Michael's theme of looking for hope or optimism and take us back to the subcontinent or the larger region and focus not on Afghanistan but on Bangladesh, because Bangladesh was also caught up in the US politics with the Nixon-Kissinger tilt towards China. And there was a civil war that the US didn't recognize or take as much issue with as they might. And after that civil war, Bangladesh was sort of abandoned as a basket case, and the word triage was used. But in fact, what we have in Bangladesh right now, and you've heard it in the press sometimes, is one of the Muslim countries with democratic institutions. It's the place where the microfinance revolution happened. It's a society where the NGO sector, non-government sector, works with government as closely and as powerfully as anywhere. We're told that the women's vote has made a large difference in recent elections. So I think I will pick up on the theme that war and then peace, if peace comes, are opportunities for transition. And I think there are a lot of lessons that can be learned from Bangladesh, which after all is in the same region, it's been part of that same complex of how we might think about rebuilding Afghanistan or helping Afghanistan really rebuild itself. And it took, in the case of the NGO sector, a Western-trained economist, a Western-trained doctor, and a Western-trained accountant who all went back and started these remarkably vibrant non-government efforts that have really changed the whole environment. So I think there is hope from a country that George Harrison had us all worry about and Kissinger wanted us to ignore, and it gives us hope for Afghanistan.
My name is Sanjeev Kagram, and as some of you know, I'm an assistant professor here at the Kennedy School, and as some of you also know, put a lot of energy with a lot of other folks in trying to get this series started. And so my first sign of hope is that we are here right now, and with all its difficulties and challenges, we're trying to figure out new models for talking to each other and for deliberating, and for me to hear the pain and also the hope of different people who I may not really understand. And for me, that's a really deep and fundamental and existential question. I mean, the question we asked, the questions we started this conversation with, and I'd like to bring us back to, I know Roshnak and Nolan will, is what world do you want? What world do I want? And what role do I want to play in it? I think for me to answer that question, and September 11th and its aftermath has once again forced me to rethink again, to talk to all the people that care for me and I care about, to people I don't know. I have to go back to sort of who I am and where I've come from. I was third generation South Asian in Uganda. My family was expelled from Uganda by Idi Amin's regime. My family lost everything that they had. We were split to all corners of the world. Some people going to India, some people going to England, some of us going to the United States, some of us going to Kenya. We ended up in the United States, and I grew up in New Jersey, as some of you know. And there, the lesson that my parents took from this experience were two. One was that education was the only thing that could never be taken away from you. And so therefore, their son and their daughter would be educated. And that knowledge would empower them and protect them. And then the other one was that one had to be integrated in the society that they lived in. One could not sort of go into a new society as an outsider, as South Asians, Indians in Uganda, or Indian Americans in the United States, and not be part of that society, get involved. And so I took those, and my sister took those lessons to heart. And my sister is now an attorney for the INS. I, as you know, have taken a different path. And we fight a lot because she's actually helps people get exported, get deported. And I don't see how she can take our experience and do that kind of work. But she's a public servant, and so I respect her for doing that work every day. And she has a vision that this is also for the good. For me, when I came to the Kennedy School, I mean, I went and did all my degrees, and soon, and even, you know, when I was growing up in New Jersey, so being part and being a public servant meant that you had to be, and as I became the president of my senior class, and the governor of my boys' state, and homecoming king, not queen, luckily, maybe, and to be really someone who was integrated and who would show that anyone could make a difference, could live the American dream. And I was convinced that I would go into U.S. politics when I got older. But there also came a time when I said, well, there's something really wrong because I really don't fit here in the United States. There's something that either I'm not understanding or other people are not understanding about who I am and what this country is about, or maybe what the world is about. So I took a long detour away from that goal and went out to many countries around the world. And most of the last 15 years of my life has been outside the United States. And in that process, those same sorts of ideas of knowledge can empower, we can make a difference, and that hope that public service in all different fashions would make the world, not only the United States, our communities a better place, has sort of carried me through, whether it was the villages in Nigeria or the urban slums of India or post-Reconstruction, post-transition South Africa, or indigenous communities in the Amazon, which I've had all the great fortune to go to. And there I saw the hope. They had hope every day. Yes, they were struggling and there were the challenges and the hope was there. And so I'd always ask them, what can I do for you? And they'd always say, we really like having you here, but go back and tell them to change what they do in the United States. And so I come back and I think, well, how can I do that? Because I feel that electoral politics, maybe for a lot of reasons, that's an avenue that's closed off to me. And I think, well, what have I learned? Maybe I can share that in the classroom, through my teaching, through my writing, through my publishing. And I come to the Kennedy School because it is this grand place of interdisciplinary theory and practice for changing the world in a positive way. And the hope is there. And I see my students and all the students who I learn more from, I'm sure, than they learn from me, and my colleagues. And I feel that here, and this is where my hope really lies, in the nearest and most immediate term, that we don't deliberate. We don't even begin to sort of push ourselves to understand each other. We have that opportunity. It is there before us. And you know, even Michael and I, who sit in the same center, and he's my director, and we talk, but we never really talk because we disagree fundamentally. I see what happened after World War II as immensely devastating to the world. Not positive. Yeah, there are silver linings in there that one hopes to take from, but most of it I see as destructive. And so I share much more what Senator Pryor says, that that generation really failed. But what the failures, if you connect it with knowledge, provides us with the lessons for success. And so the Academy, a place like the Kennedy School, is a place to do that kind of deep thinking and bring it to the world. And so the part of this conversation that we want to continue and what we're trying to build here is that type of pushing and probing. So I can say to Michael, I just don't understand how you can see Bretton Woods as a positive thing after World War II. And he can say, well, don't you see? They've done all these wonderful things. And maybe we can then begin to go beyond this crisis of understanding that maybe as at root of the challenges that we face as the crisis of differential power relations, unequal power relations. Can we move beyond what we know of ourselves and what we believe to really understand what the other person or the other group or the other community thinks? And someone who is transnational now, not only am I not a sort of transplanted African, South Asian, New Jerseyan, Californian to to Cambridge, Massachusetts. My wife is Latina, my son is trilingual. We are building a transnational community in our household daily. And there I see the hope of bringing worlds together. But he, my son, Ram Manuel, can't do that by himself. And he can't do it unless we support him to do it. And he can't do that if he doesn't know who he is. And so I'd like to bring it back to that notion, that the hope I have is that what this event is trying to tell us to do is to find out more about who we are and who the other person might be. And that's the beginning of our salvation. That's the beginning of our hope and the world we want to create. And so globalization without diversity and celebration of diversity and our long cultural and identity linkages seems to be not a globalization worth having. And so I would, as this is a microcosm of that kind of deliberation seems to me the hope and that kind of conversation. And then certainly go out there and volunteer and do the work and do public service and think secondly about six figures and all the rest. But for me, and I'll come back to this, the world that I'd like to see is a world in which my son can feel comfortable, not only in the United States, but anywhere that he may choose to live with whoever he may choose to live. And so for me, that really, I start to question whether I should be here teaching in this glorious place with all its resources and all its problems and hopes, or I should be out there maybe trying to run for elected office, or maybe I should go out and go back to the developing world and work in local universities there on local projects. And so I agree with Michael, the opportunities are endless, but unthoughtful or sort of jumping in without thinking it through and working it through with others seems to be not the way to do it, because that's what I think the failures of the past were. And that's where my hope lies. And I want to thank all of you for coming, because it has really, really re-inspired me to feel part of this community, which I've had real challenges about, particularly since September 11th and its aftermath.
I think on that amazing piece, we'll bring the informal section to a close and go even more informal. Feel free to mill about, tackle any of our honored guests and make him give you the answers, because I know they have it and they're just not sharing. As Sanjeev said, I want to thank each and every one of you for your courage, for sharing, for getting me personally to think. And I passed out some note cards that I would ask you to please think about issues that maybe you wanted to say and you didn't get a chance to get the mic or didn't feel comfortable to say. What you would like to see. We're going to have future events like this next semester. What do you want us to have those be about? Do you want it to focus specifically on globalization, on human rights, on how the United States is dealing with the terrorism issue? What do you want us to do for you to make the dialogue and the thinking process more meaningful? And I would like for us to kind of end with a minute of silence for all the people who have lost their lives and are suffering with the losses in their lives, and all the people who have struggled for our freedoms on the eve of this special anniversary, and all the people who struggle every day. So let's have a minute. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening.